The fluorescent lights of the Peachtree Recreation Center hummed a monotonous tune, casting a sterile glow over the polished wooden floor. The air, thick with the scent of sweat and disinfectant, vibrated with the rhythmic thud of feet and the sharp snaps of GIs. Devin, the instructor, a man built like a coiled spring, paced the length of the mat, his sharp eyes scanning the rows of students practicing their katas. He adjusted his black belt, a familiar gesture that betrayed a flicker of unease. Tonight's beginner/intermediate sparring class was proving unpredictable. He'd just managed to quell a minor scuffle between two overeager teenagers when the door creaked open, admitting a figure that caused the rhythm of the class to falter, then stumble into an awkward silence. Thelma Grant stood framed in the doorway, a small, unassuming woman dwarfed by the bulky duffel bag slung over her shoulder. Her silver hair, pulled back in a tight bun, accentuated the sharp angles of her face. She wore a simple, faded gray tracksuit, a stark contrast to the crisp white GIs of the other students. Thelma paused, her gaze sweeping over the room, seemingly unfazed by the sudden hush and the curious stares directed at her. Devin felt a prickle of irritation. This was not how he envisioned his Tuesday evening unfolding. A ripple of laughter, barely suppressed, spread through the ranks of the younger students. Jaden Reyes, a lanky teenager with a swagger that far outweighed his actual skill, nudged his friend and smirked. He muttered something under his breath that Devin couldn't quite catch, but the meaning was clear. The old lady was a joke. Shanice, a quiet girl with watchful eyes, shifted uncomfortably. She wasn't sure why the woman's presence felt so unsettling, so different. Perhaps it was the unwavering calm in her pale blue eyes, a stillness that seemed to absorb the surrounding chaos. Thelma, oblivious or perhaps indifferent to the whispers and stares, moved with surprising agility. She crossed the room, her steps measured and precise, and placed her duffel bag by the edge of the mat. Her movements, though slow, held an undeniable grace, a hint of something coiled and powerful beneath the surface. Devin, his initial annoyance giving way to a bewildered curiosity, approached her. "Ma'am, you here to see someone?" he asked, the question laced with a polite dismissal. He couldn't shake the feeling that there had been a mistake, a miscommunication. This woman, with her gentle demeanor and age-spotted hands, seemed utterly out of place in his karate class. Thelma met his gaze, her eyes, though faded with age, holding a surprising depth. "No," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "I'm here for the 6 o'clock class." Devin's doubt deepened, etching itself onto his face. He glanced at the clock on the wall, confirming the time. "This is a beginner/intermediate sparring class, ma'am," he explained, his tone carefully neutral. He struggled to reconcile the image before him with the demands of the class. The sparring, while controlled, could still be physically demanding. He couldn't, in good conscience, allow this fragile-looking woman to participate. Thelma's lips twitched, a barely perceptible movement that hinted at amusement. Internally, she sighed. This was always the reaction. The polite dismissal, the veiled concern, the assumption of frailty. She'd grown accustomed to it, even learned to anticipate it. It had been years since she'd set foot in a dojo, years since she'd felt the familiar thrum of anticipation that now pulsed beneath her calm exterior. Returning to this world, the world of disciplined movement and controlled power, felt both exhilarating and strangely melancholic. It was a return to a part of herself she'd thought long buried. "I understand," Thelma said, her voice betraying none of her inner turmoil. "I'd still like to participate." Devin hesitated, his internal monologue a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts. He couldn't simply turn her away, but he also couldn't risk her getting injured. He was about to suggest she observe the class, perhaps consider the gentler Tai Chi sessions offered on Wednesdays, when Jaden, unable to contain himself any longer, let out a loud snort. "Seriously, Grandma? You think you can handle this?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. His friend snickered, emboldened by his bravado. Shanice cringed, her cheeks flushing with embarrassment. She glanced at Thelma, expecting to see anger, perhaps even fear, but instead, she found only a quiet composure that bordered on indifference. It was as if Jaden's taunt had barely registered, a mere buzzing fly against the solid wall of Thelma's presence. Devin shot Jaden a warning look, then turned back to Thelma, his voice tight with frustration. "Look, ma'am," he began, searching for the right words, the words that would gently steer her away from potential harm without outright dismissing her. He couldn't articulate the unease that gnawed at him, the sense that something was off. Thelma, however, seemed to have reached her limit. The subtle shift in her posture, the slight narrowing of her eyes, spoke volumes. "Young man," she said, addressing Jaden directly, her voice low but resonant, "I've faced opponents far more formidable than you. My age is not a measure of my capability." The room fell silent. Even Jaden, momentarily stunned by the steel in her voice, seemed to shrink back. Thelma's gaze swept over the faces of the students, a silent challenge in her pale blue eyes. "If you doubt my ability," she continued, her voice regaining its gentle cadence, "I'd be happy to demonstrate." The air crackled with anticipation. The initial amusement had vanished, replaced by a palpable tension. Devin, caught between his responsibility as an instructor and a growing fascination, found himself nodding. He couldn't explain it, but something in Thelma's unwavering gaze, and the quiet strength that emanated from her small frame, compelled him to agree. He cleared his throat, addressing the class. "All right, everyone, partner up. Mrs. Grant, if you'd be so kind." Thelma's small smile held a hint of something dangerous, something that sent a shiver down Shanice's spine. It was the smile of a predator, not malicious, but utterly confident. The smile of someone who knew exactly what they were capable of. The air in the dojo hung thick and heavy, a mixture of sweat, anticipation, and the faint, lingering scent of disinfectant. Thelma Grant, a small, wiry woman with hair the color of winter wheat, stood quietly amidst the flurry of activity. Around her, the karate class, a mixed bag of ages and skill levels, buzzed with nervous energy. The younger students, their GIs crisp and white, bounced on the balls of their feet, eager to impress. The older ones, their uniforms softened with years of wear, moved with a practiced ease, their faces betraying a quiet confidence. Thelma, her own GI, a faded testament to a life lived far from the prying eyes of small-town Georgia, observed it all with an unnerving stillness. Her hands, gnarled with age, rested lightly at her sides, but her eyes, sharp and unwavering, missed nothing. "Old lady's gonna break a hip," she heard a voice snicker nearby. It was Jaden Reyes, a teenager whose arrogance was almost as palpable as the humidity in the air. He strutted around the mat, flexing his biceps and showing off his newly acquired orange belt as if it were a badge of supreme honor. Thelma's lips twitched, the barest hint of a smile playing at the corners. Let the boy preen, she thought, her inner voice a calm oasis in the storm of youthful bravado. Youth is its own kind of blindness. She began her stretches, each movement deliberate and precise, a silent symphony of muscle and memory. Her joints protested with the familiar twinge of age, but her mind remained sharp, each breath a quiet anchor in the present moment. Jaden continued his whispered commentary, each barb aimed at Thelma's age and perceived frailty, designed to elicit laughter and bolster his own shaky confidence. He called her Grandma Karate and mimicked her slow, deliberate movements, earning a few snickers from his equally insecure entourage. Thelma's focus remained inward. These boys, their taunts are like pebbles thrown at a mountain. They make a sound, yes, but the mountain remains. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, the familiar scent of the dojo, transporting her back decades, to a different time, a different place. A time when the sting of a strike was a lesson learned, not a slight to be avenged. A younger instructor, his face still smooth and unlined, approached her, his brow furrowed with a mixture of concern and uncertainty. "Need some help with stretches, ma'am?" he asked, his voice tinged with that particular brand of Southern politeness that could conceal a multitude of assumptions. Thelma opened her eyes, her gaze steady and unflappable. "You ever do double roundhouse kicks from a horse stance, baby?" she asked, her voice low and surprisingly resonant. Before the young instructor could process her question, she flowed seamlessly into the stance, her body a coiled spring. With a speed that belied her age, she executed 2 perfect roundhouse kicks, the air whistling around her feet. The force of her movement stirred the stagnant air of the dojo, a sudden gust in a still room. The young instructor's jaw dropped, his eyes widening in disbelief. He stammered, "No, ma'am. I can't say I have." His carefully constructed facade of composure crumbled, revealing the genuine awe beneath. Thelma simply nodded, a flicker of amusement in her eyes. Surprise is a potent weapon, she thought, especially against those who underestimate you. She resumed her stretches, the whispers around her now replaced by an uneasy silence. The other students, initially dismissive, now watched her with a newfound respect, their earlier bravado replaced by a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Shanice, a young woman with a serious demeanor and a neatly tied brown belt, observed Thelma with open admiration. She had initially been skeptical, like most of the class, but Thelma's effortless display of skill had ignited a spark of fascination. Shanice felt a pull toward this quiet, powerful woman, a sense of kinship that transcended age and experience. "There's a story there," she mused, a story etched in every line on her face, in every precise movement of her body. Shanice yearned to know that story, to learn from the wisdom it held. Thelma felt the weight of their gazes, the shift in the room's energy. She knew what they were thinking, the questions swirling in their minds. They see the age, the frailty, she thought, but they don't see the steel beneath the surface, the years of discipline, the battles fought and won, both on the mat and within. She didn't seek their approval, didn't need their validation. She was here for herself, to reconnect with a part of her that had been dormant for too long, a part of her that thrived on the discipline and the quiet power of the martial arts. Devin, the lead instructor, watched the scene unfold with a thoughtful expression. He had initially been hesitant about Thelma joining the class, concerned about her age and potential for injury. But there was a quiet authority in her demeanor, a confidence that transcended the physical that had intrigued him. Now, seeing her move, he recognized a depth of skill that went far beyond the belts and trophies that adorned his own walls. She's not here to prove anything, he realized. She's here to remember. He felt a surge of respect for the elderly woman, a respect born not of pity or condescension, but of genuine admiration. The air in the dojo crackled with a new kind of energy, a silent acknowledgement of the power that resided in the quietest corners, the power that bloomed late and unexpectedly, like a winter rose. The pungent scent of sweat and canvas mats hung heavy in the air, the rhythmic thuds of feet and the sharp exhales of exertion forming a percussive backdrop. Devin, the instructor, clapped his hands, the sound cutting through the ambient noise. "All right, everyone, partner up. Let's put those drills into practice." A flurry of movement rippled through the class as students paired off, a subtle dance of ego and camaraderie playing out in the selection process. Jaden Reyes, all elbows and adolescent swagger, scanned the room, his eyes lingering dismissively on a smaller girl who tentatively offered him a hesitant smile. He snorted, a puff of disdain escaping his nostrils. "Nah, I'm good." His internal monologue echoed his outward arrogance. "Gotta pick someone who can actually put up a fight. Make myself look good." His gaze, predatory and amused, landed on Thelma. "Bet Grandma wants to try." He smirked, a cruel glint in his eye. Thelma, who had been quietly observing the class dynamics, felt a flicker of annoyance, a spark against the placid surface of her composure. He thinks he's clever. The thought was a dry whisper in her mind, tinged with a weary amusement. "I'll just shadow," she replied, her voice calm, the faintest tremor of steel underlying its gentleness. Shadowing, practicing the movements without a partner, allowed her to focus on her own form, on the precision and flow that had been ingrained in her over decades. It was a meditation, a communion with the discipline that had shaped her life. Shadow? More like nap time, Jaden quipped, his laughter echoing through the dojo, punctuated by the snickers of a few sycophants. Thelma closed her eyes briefly, a practiced exercise in controlling her reaction. Let him think what he wants. The years had taught her the futility of engaging with such shallow provocations. She began to move, her body flowing through the kata with a grace that belied her age. Each block, each strike was precise, controlled, a testament to years of dedicated practice. But the subtleties of her movements were lost on most of the class, their eyes drawn to the more flamboyant displays of the younger students. Jaden, paired with a nervous-looking boy half his size, exaggerated his movements, his kicks unnecessarily high, his blocks theatrical. He stole glances at Thelma, expecting to see her struggling to keep up, but she remained unfazed, her focus unwavering. She's probably just going through the motions, he thought, dismissive. Old lady like that. Can't possibly have any real power. He landed a particularly forceful kick, the thud reverberating through the room, and grinned, basking in the imagined admiration of his peers. Shanice, however, watched Thelma with growing fascination. Her own movements, while competent, lacked the effortless fluidity that Thelma displayed. There was a quiet power in the older woman's form, a sense of control that Shanice instinctively recognized. She's not just going through the motions, Shanice thought, her mind buzzing with a nascent respect. There's something more. She tried to mimic Thelma's posture, the subtle shift in weight, the precise angle of her arms. It felt different, stronger. Thelma, oblivious to the ripple of reactions she was creating, continued her shadow practice. Each movement was a breath, a heartbeat, a connection to a deeper part of herself. The dojo faded away, replaced by the bamboo forest of her childhood, the crisp mountain air on her skin, the steady voice of her sensei guiding her through the ancient forms. She was not merely practicing karate. She was embodying it. Jaden, fueled by a potent cocktail of youthful arrogance and the perceived indifference of his target, decided to escalate. The simmering frustration at Thelma's calm demeanor, at her refusal to acknowledge his taunts, not at him. He wanted a reaction, a flicker of fear, a sign of weakness. He stopped his practice, his chest heaving slightly, and strode towards Thelma. Devin, distracted by correcting another student's form, didn't notice the shift in the dynamic. Jaden stopped in front of Thelma, his shadow falling over her. "So, Grandma," he sneered, the word dripping with condescension. "Think you can do more than just shadow?" His internal monologue raced. "Show them all. Show her. Old lady like this." One good shove. He didn't consciously intend to hurt her, but the reckless impulse to assert his dominance pulsed through him. Thelma paused, her movement arrested mid-kata. She opened her eyes, her gaze meeting Jaden's. There was no fear in her eyes, no anger, only a quiet assessment, a depth that seemed to see straight through his bravado. A faint, almost imperceptible sigh escaped her lips. So be it, she thought. He wants a lesson. I could provide one. Perhaps, she said, her voice soft, yet carrying an undeniable weight. If you insist. The pungent smell of sweat and canvas mats filled the air, a familiar aroma that Thelma had almost forgotten. Years had passed since she last stood in a dojo, yet her body remembered. The polished wooden floor gleamed under the fluorescent lights, reflecting the nervous energy of the students. Thelma adjusted the borrowed GI, the rough fabric a stark contrast to the silk she was accustomed to. She watched Devin, the instructor, pair students for sparring drills. A flicker of apprehension, a fleeting ghost of doubt, brushed against her, swiftly suppressed by a lifetime of discipline. She wasn't here to prove anything. This was about reconnecting with a lost part of herself, not about impressing a room full of strangers. Devin called out names, his voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. "Jaden, you're with Thelma." A snicker rippled through the class. Thelma saw Jaden, the boy with the restless energy and the arrogant smirk, approach her. He was young, barely a man, his movements all bravado and poorly concealed insecurity. Thelma's lips tightened almost imperceptibly. She had seen this type before. All flash, little substance. "Ready, Grandma." Jaden's voice dripped with a condescending sweetness that grated on Thelma's nerves. His eyes, she noticed, darted around the room, seeking the approval of his peers. He wanted an audience. "Fine, let him have his show." "Whenever you are," Thelma replied, her voice calm, a wellspring of stillness in the swirling currents of the dojo. She took her stance, her body settling into a familiar rhythm. The years melted away. Muscle memory took over, a language older than words. Jaden's internal monologue was a whirlwind of anticipation. He imagined the scene unfolding, a swift takedown, the astonished gasps of the class, Shanice's admiring glance. He'd show them. He'd show this old lady what real speed looked like. He lunged, a clumsy imitation of a Bruce Lee kick aimed at Thelma's head. Thelma barely moved. A slight shift of weight, a subtle twist of her body, and Jaden's foot sailed harmlessly past her ear. He stumbled, off balance. Thelma's hand shot out, not to strike but to steady him. A wave of confused embarrassment washed over Jaden. He hadn't expected that. He'd expected fear, hesitation, maybe even a yelp. Not this calm. He recovered his balance, a flicker of uncertainty now shadowing his arrogance. "You got lucky," he muttered, his voice losing some of its swagger. "You fell," Thelma responded, her tone devoid of judgment, simply stating a fact. The class watched in stunned silence. Shanice, initially apprehensive for Thelma, found herself captivated by the older woman's effortless grace. There was a quiet power in her movements, a deep-seated confidence that radiated outwards. Jaden, stung by Thelma's simple observation and the quiet murmurs of the class, attacked again. This time, a series of punches, fast and furious, aimed at Thelma's torso. Thelma moved like water, flowing around his attacks, her blocks precise and economical. Each contact, though light, carried a subtle force that pushed Jaden back, disrupting his rhythm. Thelma's mind was clear, focused. She wasn't fighting Jaden, she was dancing with him. She felt the rhythm of his movements, the ebb and flow of his energy. She anticipated his next move before he even knew it himself. It wasn't about strength, it was about understanding. Jaden's frustration mounted with each blocked punch. He felt like he was hitting air. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. He was the star student, the fastest, the strongest. Yet, this elderly woman, with her calm eyes and her unhurried movements, was making him look like a fool. He threw a wild kick, fueled by desperation. Thelma sidestepped, her hand catching his ankle mid-air. Gently, but firmly, she swept his supporting leg out from under him. He landed on the mat with a thud. The sound echoed in the sudden silence of the dojo. Jaden lay there for a moment, stunned. The air rushed out of his lungs. He looked up at Thelma, his arrogance replaced by a dawning respect. He had underestimated her. Badly. Thelma offered him a hand. He took it, his cheeks burning with shame. He had wanted to show off, to impress. Instead, he had been schooled, not with brute force, but with skill and control he could only dream of. "Again?" Thelma asked, her voice soft, almost a whisper. Jaden nodded, his earlier bravado gone, replaced by a genuine desire to learn. He saw now that there was more to karate than flashy moves and loud boasts. There was a depth, a discipline that he had never glimpsed before. He wanted that. A subtle shift occurred in the atmosphere of the dojo. The initial skepticism and amusement had evaporated, replaced by a quiet awe. Thelma, the unassuming elderly woman, had become the center of attention, not through boisterous display, but through quiet mastery. The whispers started again, this time tinged with admiration. Shanice watched, her eyes wide with newfound respect, a seed of inspiration planted in her young heart. Even Devon, the instructor, observed with a thoughtful expression, recognizing a level of skill that transcended age and appearance. The lesson had begun, not just for Jaden, but for everyone in the room. The air in the dojo, thick with the scent of sweat and old mats, vibrated with a restless energy. Thelma, her breath still even despite the recent exertion, tilted her head back and drank deeply from her water bottle. The cool liquid slid down her throat, a soothing balm against the heat blooming in her muscles. Around her, the other students were a kaleidoscope of reactions. Whispers, wide eyes, a palpable shift in the atmosphere. She had known it would be this way. This dance of disbelief, the underestimation, the eventual grudging acknowledgement. It was a familiar rhythm. She danced it for decades. Jaden, face flushed crimson, pushed himself up from the mat, his pride bruised more than his body. He dusted off his GI, the movement jerky and aggressive, a thin veil over his humiliation. Old woman, he thought, the words bitter on his tongue. Lucky shot. Thelma capped her water bottle, the click echoing in the sudden hush. She met Jaden's gaze, her own steady and unwavering. Perhaps, she said, her voice quiet but carrying easily across the room, you rely too much on flourish. Jaden bristled. What's that supposed to mean? He took a step closer, his fists clenching and unclenching. Thelma's expression remained unchanged, a subtle amusement flickering in the depths of her dark eyes. Always the same, she thought, a faint echo of weariness threading through her amusement. Youth and its volatile pride. Control, she explained, her voice still calm, is not about how high you can kick or how fast you can punch. It's about knowing when not to. Respect is earned, right? Jaden challenged, his voice tight. Thelma's gaze didn't waver. You ain't earned it yet. A ripple went through the class. Devin, the instructor, cleared his throat, his expression a blend of surprise and unease. He'd expected to be mediating a conflict, not witnessing a philosophical debate. Jaden opened his mouth to retort, but Thelma continued, her voice taking on a distant quality, as if she were speaking to herself as much as to him. In Okinawa, she murmured, her eyes seeming to focus on something far beyond the dojo walls. My sensei used to say, she paused, a faint smile touching her lips, that a true warrior does not seek victory, but mastery. Jaden shifted his weight, unsure how to respond to this cryptic pronouncements. Okinawa? He thought. What's she talking about? Thelma's words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken experience. The other students, initially captivated by the physical display, were now drawn into something deeper, something intangible. Shanice, a younger girl with a quiet intensity, leaned forward, her eyes fixed on Thelma. She felt a strange pull towards this elderly woman, a sense of hidden depths waiting to be explored. So, Jaden said, pushing down his uncertainty, try to regain some semblance of control. What's your secret, then? Some ancient Okinawa magic. His tone was mocking, but underneath, a flicker of genuine curiosity had been kindled. Thelma looked at him, her gaze piercing. Patience, she said simply. Discipline, and the understanding that true strength comes not from force, but from within. Jaden, still smarting from his defeat, couldn't let it go. He feinted a jab, trying to provoke her into another demonstration. Thelma didn't move, her body relaxed, her eyes watching his every twitch. When he lunged, she sidestepped effortlessly, his momentum carrying him past her. He stumbled, off balance, and barely managed to catch himself before falling again. A low chuckle rippled through the class. This time, the shame was tinged with a grudging admiration. He felt a strange mix of resentment and respect. He couldn't deny her skill, her uncanny ability to read his movements before he even made them. It was unsettling, and yet strangely compelling. Shanice raised her hand, her voice hesitant but clear. Sensei Grant, she began, using the honorific without a trace of irony. That move, how did you do that? Thelma turned to her, her expression softening. It's not about the move itself, she explained, her voice gentle, but about understanding your opponent's center of gravity, their intention. She demonstrated a simple shift of weight, explaining how a subtle adjustment could redirect force, turning an attacker's momentum against them. Jaden watched, a strange knot forming in his stomach. It wasn't just about technique, it was about a way of thinking, a way of being that he had never considered before. He looked at Thelma, really looked at her, not as an old woman, but as a teacher, a master. The arrogance that had clung to him like a second skin began to crumble. He felt a strange pull towards this elderly woman, a sense of hidden depths waiting to be explored. He wanted to know more. He needed to know more. Thelma, sensing the shift in him, offered a small, almost imperceptible nod. The lesson, it seemed, had begun. The scent of sweat and old canvas mats hung heavy in the air, a familiar aroma that usually invigorated Thelma. Now, it carried a faint metallic tang, a subtle whisper of the tension that crackled through the dojo. The fluorescent lights, harsh and unforgiving, glinted off the polished wooden floor, reflecting the faces of the students gathered around the sparring mat. They were a sea of youthful energy, their eyes, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension, fixed on her. Thelma felt a flicker of something akin to amusement. They still underestimated her. She adjusted the belt of her GI, the crisp cotton a stark contrast to the tremors that danced beneath her seemingly placid exterior. It wasn't fear, not exactly. More like the quiet hum of anticipation before a storm. Jaden, the boy who had challenged her earlier, stood opposite her, his youthful arrogance momentarily subdued, replaced by a cautious respect. He feigned nonchalance, stretching his arms and bouncing on the balls of his feet, but Thelma saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He thinks he understands what's coming, she thought, a dry, almost brittle smile playing on her lips. He has no idea. Devin, the instructor, stepped forward, his voice echoing in the relative silence. Second round. Remember, control, and respect. Begin. His words were directed at both of them, but Thelma knew they were meant primarily for Jaden. A subtle warning, perhaps a reminder that she was not just another sparring partner. Jaden moved first, quick and agile, a flurry of punches and kicks aimed at disorienting her. Thelma watched, her eyes tracking his every move, her mind a calm pool amidst the chaos. Impatient, she observed, the thought forming as easily as breathing. He wants to end this quickly, prove something. She blocked his attacks with effortless grace, her movements economical, almost languid, yet imbued with a strength that belied her age. Each parry, each shift of her weight, spoke of years of discipline, of a deep understanding of the art that transcended mere physical prowess. "You're scared now," Jaden taunted, his voice laced with a bravado he clearly didn't feel. The question hung in the air, met with a silence that felt heavier than any response. Thelma didn't reply. Words were unnecessary. Her actions would speak for themselves. The shift came subtly, almost imperceptibly. Jaden, fueled by adrenaline and youthful exuberance, began to tire, his movements becoming less precise, his breathing ragged. Thelma, on the other hand, seemed to draw strength from the stillness within her. She was a predator, patient and calculating, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. The moment arrived. Jaden lunged, a predictable attack aimed at her midsection. Thelma sidestepped, her movement fluid and precise, and with a swift, almost gentle motion, she redirected his momentum, using his own force against him. He stumbled, off balance, and before he could recover, she executed a perfect sweep, sending him sprawling onto the mat. The thud of his body against the canvas echoed in the sudden silence that descended upon the room. Thelma stood over him, her chest rising and falling steadily, her expression unreadable. There was no triumph in her stance, no gloating, only the quiet satisfaction of a task completed. Jaden, his face flushed with exertion and something else, perhaps shame, perhaps a dawning realization, looked up at her, his earlier arrogance completely extinguished. The silence stretched, broken only by the rasp of Jaden's breath. Then, a ripple went through the room, a collective intake of breath followed by hushed whispers. Thelma felt the shift in the atmosphere, the palpable change from mocking disbelief to awed respect. The young girl, Shanice, her eyes wide with admiration, stepped forward. "That was incredible," she breathed, the words barely audible. Thelma offered her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of the compliment. The corners of her lips twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. It wasn't about proving anything to them, not really. It was about the quiet, unwavering flame that burned within her, the connection to something deeper, something that transcended age and expectations. It was about honoring the past, embracing the present, and facing the future with the same quiet strength that had carried her through countless storms. Devin cleared his throat, his voice breaking the spell. "Class dismissed," he announced, his tone tinged with a newfound respect. The students dispersed, their earlier chatter replaced by hushed conversations, their eyes still drawn to Thelma as she gathered her belongings. As she walked out of the dojo, the cool evening air against her face, Thelma felt a sense of peace settle over her. The echoes of the past intertwined with the rhythm of the present, a quiet symphony of resilience and strength. She hadn't come here to prove anything to anyone. She had come for herself, to reconnect with the part of her that found solace in the discipline of the art, in the quiet power of self-mastery. And in that, she had found more than she had bargained for. The fluorescent lights of the Peachtree Recreation Center buzzed, casting a sickly yellow glow over the asphalt parking lot. Thelma Grant adjusted her worn canvas bag over her shoulder, the weight of her GI a familiar comfort. The crisp night air, tinged with the scent of pine needles and damp earth, swirled around her, a welcome contrast to the stuffy dojo. Around her, the class lingered, their earlier boisterousness replaced by a hesitant quiet. Thelma hadn't noticed the small crowd gathering until Devin, the instructor, cleared his throat. "Sensei Grant," he began, his voice laced with a newfound respect that warmed something deep within her. That was incredible. Thelma offered a small, tight smile. Incredible. Such a grand word for something that felt ordinary. Just movements. Muscle memory etched into her bones over decades. Yet she understood. For them, for these young, untested souls, it was a spectacle. A glimpse into a world they hadn't yet earned a right to inhabit. Jaden Reyes shuffled his feet, his earlier bravado replaced by an awkward fidgeting. Thelma observed him, her gaze steady, unwavering. He avoided her eyes, the shame palpable. She knew this dance, the brash confidence of youth, crumbling under the weight of unexpected reality. He reminded her of, well, of many. Young men who mistook volume for strength, swagger for substance. She had met so many like him in her life, both inside and outside the dojo. Men who saw her age, her quiet demeanor, and dismissed her as irrelevant. Fools. Sensei, Shanice, the young woman with the bright, eager eyes, stepped forward, her voice laced with genuine admiration. "How did you get so good?" Thelma sighed, a sound like rustling leaves. How to explain a lifetime condensed into a single breath? "Practice," she said, her voice low, raspy, and a few hard lessons. The group leaned in, their faces illuminated by the harsh parking lot lights, hungry for her words. They thought it was about the karate, about the physical prowess. They didn't understand. It wasn't about the kicks or the blocks. It was about the internal battles, the ones fought in the silence of your own mind. "My husband," he used to say. Thelma paused, the image of his kind face etched with worry lines, flashing in her mind. That life throws punches harder than any opponent. A bitter smile tugged at the corner of her lips. He had been right, of course. Losing him had been the hardest blow of all, a blow that had knocked the wind out of her, left her gasping for air in the suffocating darkness. The dojo had been her sanctuary then, a place where she could channel the grief, the rage, the bone-deep loneliness into something productive, something life-affirming. It had saved her. She looked at Jaden, his gaze finally meeting hers. "It's easy to throw punches when the lights are on," she said, her voice resonating with a quiet power. "When everyone's watching, cheering you on. But the real fight happens when nobody sees you. When you're down, bruised, and the only thing keeping you going is the sheer will to get back up. Jaden swallowed, his throat bobbing nervously. He was starting to understand. Thelma could see it in his eyes, the flicker of recognition. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a dawning awareness. I didn't come here to be seen, Thelma continued, her gaze sweeping over the faces of her students, their youthful features etched with curiosity and a newfound respect. I came to see if I could still hold my own. In the quiet hum of the parking lot lights, a wave of understanding washed over the small group. They had underestimated her, judged her by her outward appearance, by the wrinkles etched around her eyes, by the slow, deliberate way she moved. They had seen weakness where there was only quiet strength. Jaden stepped forward, his shoulders slumped, his voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Sensei, for everything." Thelma studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, a ghost of a smile touched her lips. "Apologies are easy, young man. Actions speak louder." He nodded, his eyes filled with a sincerity she hadn't seen before. Devin spoke, his voice tinged with a hint of awe. "Sensei, would you consider teaching here?" Thelma paused, considering. The thought hadn't crossed her mind. She had come here for herself, for her own peace. But looking at the faces before her, the eager anticipation in their eyes, she felt a stirring of something long dormant. A desire to share, to guide, to pass on the lessons she had learned, both inside and outside the dojo. "I'll think about it," she said, her voice barely a whisper, yet it held the weight of a promise. The night air seemed to hold its breath, waiting. The lights of the recreation center flickered, casting long, dancing shadows on the asphalt. For a moment, they stood there, bathed in the yellow glow, a strange, unlikely fellowship forged in the heart of a small-town dojo. Thelma felt a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Perhaps, just perhaps, there was still some fight left in her after all. Not just for herself, but for them. The lingering scent of sweat and old mats hung heavy in the air. A familiar perfume Thelma had almost forgotten. The fluorescent lights hummed a monotonous tune, a constant backdrop to the shift in the dojo's atmosphere. It was quieter now, the earlier bravado and skepticism having dissipated like morning mist. Thelma, her knuckles bruised but her spirit unbent, sat on the edge of the mat, feeling the cool seep through her thin GI. Devin, the instructor, stood before her, a strange mix of respect and bewilderment etched on his young face. He'd seen skill before, but rarely wrapped in a package so unassuming. Thelma smoothed a stray strand of silver hair from her face, a small, unconscious gesture that spoke volumes about her inner calm. They expect a speech, she mused, her thoughts a quiet eddy beneath the surface of the room's stillness. They expect pronouncements of wisdom, but wisdom isn't given, it's earned. "So," Devin began, his voice a low rumble that echoed the uncertainty Thelma sensed in his eyes. "You never went pro?" The question hung in the air, thick with unspoken assumptions. Thelma's lips curved into a faint smile. "Pro, as if that's the only measure of worth." "No," she answered, her voice soft but firm, each word a carefully placed stone in a tranquil pond. "Never did." Jaden, the young boy who'd earlier challenged her with such fiery arrogance, sat a few feet away, his gaze fixed on Thelma. He shifted uncomfortably, the brash confidence he'd worn earlier replaced with a quiet awe. He'd expected a story of championships and trophies, a validation of his own ambitions. Instead, he was faced with something far more perplexing as strength that didn't need external validation. He felt a strange prickle of shame, remembering his earlier dismissal of this elderly woman. She doesn't even care about the trophies, he thought, the realization hitting him like a misplaced kick to the gut. There's something else, something more. Shanice, her eyes bright with admiration, leaned forward. "But you could have," she insisted, her voice barely a whisper. "You're amazing." Thelma met her gaze, a flicker of warmth in her own eyes. Youth, she thought, a poignant pang of something akin to nostalgia echoing within her. So eager to measure life in tangible achievements. Maybe, Thelma conceded, but there are other kinds of victories. She looked around the room, her gaze sweeping over the faces, each one etched with a mixture of curiosity and newfound respect. You don't got to be loud to be strong, and you don't have to be young to still matter. The silence that followed wasn't the awkward, strained silence of before. This was a silence pregnant with understanding, a silence that acknowledged the weight of her words. Devon, his earlier uncertainty replaced by a quiet admiration, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Grant," he began, his tone respectful, almost hesitant. He planned this whole session, anticipating a display of skill, maybe a short lecture on technique. He hadn't anticipated this quiet revolution in the very air of his dojo. We'd be honored if you'd consider," he trailed off, searching for the right words. Thelma watched him, her expression unreadable. She hadn't come here seeking accolades, seeking a platform. She'd come to reconnect with a part of herself she thought she'd lost, to find a rhythm in the familiar movements, a solace in the discipline. Yet, she sensed a shift within herself, a subtle awakening of something she hadn't realized. She missed the quiet satisfaction of sharing, of guiding. She saw the eager faces, the thirst for something more than just physical prowess, and a quiet resolve began to bloom within her. "Consider what?" she prompted, her voice gentle, encouraging him to continue. Devon took a deep breath, his shoulders relaxing slightly. "We were wondering if you might be willing to lead a special session once a month?" He finally managed, the words tumbling out in a rush. "A masterclass of sorts, for those who want to learn more than just how to kick and punch." A ripple of excitement went through the room, a tangible energy that hummed in the air. Jaden, his earlier arrogance completely forgotten, looked at Thelma with open admiration. Shanice, her eyes shining, nodded eagerly. The other students, initially skeptical, now looked at Thelma with a newfound respect, their faces alight with anticipation. Thelma considered his offer, a complex tapestry of emotions weaving through her. She saw the genuine respect in Devon's eyes, the eagerness in the students' faces. She felt the familiar pull of the dojo, the comforting weight of tradition and discipline. And beneath it all, a quiet sense of purpose, a flicker of the fire she thought had long since dwindled to embers. She hadn't come looking for this, but perhaps, just perhaps, this was exactly what she needed. A slow smile spread across her face, crinkling the corners of her eyes. Not for the applause, she thought, a quiet affirmation echoing within her. Not for the recognition, but for the quiet strength that blooms in the heart of perseverance. "All right," she said, her voice carrying a newfound weight, a quiet authority that resonated through the room. "All right, I'll do it.